Since its launch in 2005, Broad Street Review has sought to promote the exchange of viewpoints rather than any particular point of view. To that end, we welcome commentary from professionals and amateurs alike about the performing and visual arts, as well as any other field of interest to our eclectic group of contributors. The following interview was submitted to Broad Street Review, powered by Rep Radio. I'm your host, Darnelle Radford, and I am here at we're at Rep Radio Studio B for this interview, and I'm here with Tina Brock, who is the artistic director.
Founder and producing artistic director.
Producing artistic director of Idiopathic Ridiculopathy Consortium. How was the season this year?
A great season. Our season runs January, for just purposes of our thinking, January to December. We did Gogol's The Government Inspector back in, February of 2016. That's the one that we and that had a lot of elements that are very, very right up there with, the craziness of government and just sort of it lends itself very well. Current events lend themselves very well to that play. And then we're going to be going into The Chairs, which is a Eugene Ionesco play in the Fringe of this year. And we added a new series, which is this Into the Absurd series that we're talking about today. And that was in response to our audience wanting more opportunities to hear the works, sometimes the lesser known works that are done, and that is what led us into. We have a three show season in that little niche, the Into the Absurd program, which is happening at Latage, and it's you can come in, you can have a drink, you can be there, and these plays are very well suited for a small stage with, it's sort of like you're doing it in your living room. And the whole purpose behind it was to be able to open up the conversation to the audience, less about the production. And sometimes at talkbacks, you get these great questions about what was the thinking behind the set design? What was the thinking behind the sound? Why did the costume look like that? And a lot of times these questions are very important to the audience when seeing a main stage production. But the nice thing about Into the Absurd, and that's kind of why we called it that, is we want to delve more into the work and the language of the work and what the work means to you and how it rings true today, as you mentioned in your introduction. With the world being in the place that it is, how does this work find a place in the world of art right now and in our community? And so part of what's really fun about the series is we have someone who leads the conversation, but it really is a conversation just about what people are feeling about the way the work is hitting them. And when we started it, the first one was The American Dream by Edward Albee, which we did a couple of months ago as our sort of inaugural show. And it just sparked this wonderful conversation about what the American dream means and what the American dream doesn't mean and what it stood for back in the 1960s and really what it is or isn't today. And the conversation was really fascinating in a way that sometimes you can't get to when you're just doing, you're doing, let's say, a post-show talkback or something. So there's nothing else to comment on, really. You're not commenting on so much on the performances. You're commenting on the language and what he was trying to say. So that's what we're hoping for.
I imagine part of that conversation came up how unrealistic the American dream actually is fabrication of Hollywood.
And is that partly responsible for our continued disappointment with where we are in the world? Like you have, I think I read the other day, a very, very, very high percentage of kids, coming out of college that are living at home with their parents anymore. And so how do we measure that in terms of the thinking that we have in our mind of what it used to be, and how much is that contributing to maybe our disappointment or somehow feeling like we haven't quite gotten there when that's just the reality of today. And so I think that like reevaluating what we mean by that and talking about that can be just useful and helpful in terms of,
And since you did touch on the American dream, do you think anything has changed, or do you think that with the advancements in technology and our accessibility to media, that the real American way is now at the forefront? In a sense of, we were not actually looking at the real American dream. We were seeing a depiction. We were seeing a dream. We weren't seeing reality. And so we're actually saying that, now are we processing this as the world has changed, or really has the world been the same, but we are no longer viewing the dream?
Wow, that's a great and very interesting question. No, it's really, because it's got two parts to it. And I think, I don't know. I think it's probably both things, right? That we were Madison Avenue, or at least the time of Mad Men, and there's a safety in all of that. There's a comfort in that. Yeah. There's a longing for that, despite all of its problems, because it provides a very definable. Women had a definite role at that time, or at least that's what we were being told. And for anybody that grew up in that kind of family, for better or worse, you grew up with that as your model in a way. And for some of us, who are quite a bit older now, it hasn't been until, very recently, or, even the last decade or so, that I think I was challenging it all the time in my mind, but I think to literally challenge it in your day-to-day work. Can I be the producing artistic director of a theater company? Well, of course you can. And, but it's very interesting for me to watch kids my son's age, who's in college now, and his friends and the way they respond to the world. It's like a foreign, because they've grown up with that all along, that women can do anything and that they can, it sounds kind of odd that I'm even talking about that, but that was the American dream back in the 1950s. And I do think probably partly responsible for the reason Mad Men was so successful, in addition to it being, so many other things. Yeah. But I think there is a bit of I hate to say, longing for a safe or predictable place, which it's not anymore. As we see daily, we come out of whatever our day has been, and I said to myself the other night driving home in the car, this can't have happened today. This was on Thursday night, coming out of rehearsal, and thinking, oh my gosh, like how do we process this, and how do we stay in the conversation, about communicating about it when the emotion about it is so great and so strong, and yet. This was one of the tenets of absurdism that both Beckett and Ionesco talked a lot about it, that language is simply not sufficient to communicate. It's a very rudimentary tool for us to be able to communicate, because so much of what you are feeling about it, and probably the more potent, is what I see on your face or what I see in your body, which is why it presents a very different theatrical experience when you're on stage. And to answer your other question, I that's a complicated one. I think it's partly what we were seeing, what we were being presented, And all
of that was distant in the past. It wasn't as accessible now.
It's in our heart and on our face and our mind.
The reason we were so affected by what just happened in Nice is because it hit social media immediately. And I immediately thought, and we are prepping Fairmount Avenue for a celebration of Bastille Day. As we speak, as you and I are talking right now, Fairmount Avenue is prepping for a similar situation. And I can't imagine how everyone is feeling now that this has just happened a few days ago. And before we could say, oh, that was happening over there. But because it hit our mobile device, our computer, our television, it was right there. It was a part of a water cooler conversation. It was very, present for all of us, that we can't help but have a personal attachment to it. Like I didn't think I knew anyone who had ever lived in Nice, and I made a comment, and it wasn't like a rude comment or anything, but I just made a comment in general about how we are all feeling helpless because the systems that we put in place, whether it be military or local law enforcement, are there to protect us, and they are helpless in these situations. I live right next door to a police station and a fire station. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine if a fire just went crazy down the street and the fire station is right there, and, and the fire just burned this building to the ground with the fire station literally a block away? And feeling that sense now is how we're feeling when we hear all of this news that's coming from all over the world and in various parts of our country too. You know, Orlando was not Philadelphia, but it affected the LGBT community here, who remembers the Midtown Village that was the gayborhood, that still is the gayborhood, and then every single bar felt like Pulse for that moment, and everyone felt emotional about it. Every time an African American is killed senselessly, every single African American has to, process that as a family member. Someone in my family, my community, has just been senselessly killed. And there are also people out there saying, like, why do you even care? Why do you even care? Because it's not even your, it didn't happen here. It didn't happen to anyone you know. It's not that close. And you don't understand. I mean, going back to Orlando, these bars were safe spaces for LGBT communities. So, if you could leave all the drama outside of that place because they have security at the door, they're checking IDs, you walk into that space, and now when you're in there, you're able to shake off everything. Society saying that you can't be who you are, because in this space, you can be who you are, and it was safe. And the fact that all of that drama that was outside came inside, affected everyone who has looked at a bar as a safe space for them, or as a common ground kind of space. So,
I think that question of how we are all managing the profound and rapid series of events that have happened over the last couple of weeks, I think it's so much to process. Yeah. And as you say, I think we tend to gravitate towards our safe spaces, and the places, those few places, or wherever those places are, for us. And I feel that art is, or creating and expressing, finding a place where people can commune, that you hope is a safe space to talk about, and or just to experience and just be together, trying to put a frame around what is just an enormous sea of events and feelings about these events. I mean, finding a place to be able to put that. And I know that I went to see, it was last Friday, not last Friday, but the Friday before, in West Philly at International House. They had a viewing of Samuel Beckett's a film. It's called Film, which he did a number of years ago. And then there was a documentary about film, because it involved Buster Keaton and and it was kind of an ill-fated production that was a bit of a mess, but but the making of it was really fascinating, and it was his first foray into film. And I went in that evening, and it was really well attended, and as is common with events where Beckett, about and/or Beckett, there was a sort of for lack of a better word, religious quality to it, that people, I think there was such a sorrow and such a weariness about the events that the coming together and being in a place where we're watching a film that is, for most intents and purposes, a silent film, really, where he's trying to communicate what it means to be. He's taking the internal and putting it on film for us, so that the innermost. There was something just really lovely about being in there that evening together with other people. I had no other ideas of what I could conceivably do to feel better about something that I feel helpless in the face of. So I think it's kind of interesting that this work has kind of jumped. There's a lot more productions of Beckett happening. There's a lot more work you see. And I think it's because of that, of the silence, which is such a huge component of the work.
Yeah, I was thinking, I do remember, and I don't know if you remember this, but a few years back, Lantern Theater Company produced a Pinter piece that hadn't been produced in a long time, and I can't remember the name.
The Hot House?
Yeah.
The Hot House,
That was it, yes.
Yeah.
The Hot House. And
it's about a bunch of government officials running around, yeah.
And I remember, the reviews were sort of mixed about it. And it sort of brought up this question that, this is a rarely produced play, and I wonder why. So, but there is some value in the work in its completion, even if it wasn't one of the popular pieces. So I thought about that with these, because when you think about Beckett and Pinter, you don't think radio play, So I was definitely saying, like, since that's not even our go-to when we think about those two as creators, how did you come across these pieces?
Well, we were looking for, there was a sort of a form issue, was what are some short pieces that we can put in Latage that won't need a lot of staging, that where the language will be the focus, because we were hoping that people would focus on listening to the words and listening. So we thought, all right, so we could do this a little bit like, Lake Wobegon, where we could literally do it as a radio broadcast. But then the problem is you either need to literally do it, like shut the curtain, which, kind of defeats the purpose of having people in the audience. So we tried to choose works that you could stage around a microphone if you needed to. In other words, that the people involved, the voices involved, the characters wouldn't, there was nothing, obviously, about any kind of movement that would distract. I started doing some research and listened to a couple of Beckett's radio plays, which is an area that he went later on in his career, when he was trying to strip away and just get to the essence, which was the path that he was on for his entire career, trying to take away more and more just to get to the essence or the root of not only the language but of the silence between the language and what was being communicated in those silences. Pinter as well, he wrote for every medium. He wrote for television, he wrote for radio, film and stage. These were both done initially as BBC Radio 3 broadcasts, so it was sort of like the experimental, radio in the 1980s was when these were first done. What attracted me about the first Pinter play, and I agree with you, getting back to your statement about when you look at whatever we call like lesser works or works that aren't done as often. Sometimes we associate, well, they're not done more for a reason. Well, no, if you look at Tennessee Williams, any of the works that he did the sketches or the precursors to the later plays, you see, there's a brilliance there, and even though they're not the ones that are done more commonly, that was sort of the point, was to be able to get them out there more for people to understand, because when else are they going to be done? And for us, if you only do 3 main stage productions a year, what is a way that you can get those really important works in front of people without, maybe, so let's say they're 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and you don't want to make an evening of just short works, well, put them up at a time when when the production values really don't matter, and what matters less than in radio. So you get, so the thing is, you're going to see us on stage, sitting in chairs, reading, but I'm going to ask people to imagine, which I often do in rehearsal when I'm listening or trying to direct. I close my eyes and I just listen to what they're saying to see if it's resonating more strongly. I do that a lot. Just turn my back or just don't watch and see if could this play exist without any of what I'm seeing on stage right now, and are you being clear? So, Family Voices was one that I ran on because I'm very much fascinated with this idea that we have, like you said, all these more devices than ever before, and yet I often think, what would Beckett say about texting? And what would Ionesco say? And are we really communicating? Are we just creating more confusion? Are we creating more static? Are we creating... And I'm sort of trying to follow, I'm fascinated by the way that both Beckett and Pinter really wanted to take out all of that and just communicate the essence of what they were feeling. So here you have three characters, just literally called Voice 1, 2, and 3, that you presume are a son, a mother, and a father, although the father's deceased. And they're communicating by way of letters, but the letters aren't getting there. And so they're really, as is so typical of Pinter, he leaves a lot out. So you have to really, and that's what is so fabulous about radio, is that it's just, it really takes away your sight, and it just gives you that one piece, to hear. And then you have to make the mark on your mind, what your imagination says is happening. So you'll be able to see us, but they did it in what they called a platform presentation at the National in England in the 80s as well. And they just sat on chairs and read it. And so that won't be the big piece that you're saying. It really is about the language. And I think there is so much reason to pull out these earlier plays. So I felt like it would fit in the form.
Well, that's what I love about our community, because I think we're trying really hard to find the pieces that will help us. Let's see. What am I looking for? I think we're instead of just looking for something that'll sell, we're looking for something that really speaks to our missions, that really stands artistically, that maybe didn't have its chance or was ahead of its time, when it was originally released. There's like we just said, there's so much out there to consume that something that could be missed right now may not be picked up for another 10 or 15 years. And they'll say, oh, well, we slept on that when it first came out, but now it's so relevant. And that's why, there are there are at least 3 companies that will produce the same Shakespeare play.
Right. Yeah.
Because they'll find that the conversation that's happening in that dialogue that's attached to that piece, even back then, is still relevant today. We're still having these conversations today, but at the time, we were focused on something else. And it's also an encouragement for young writers to just continue to write and not worry about whether it's going to be a hit or not. Just complete it, finish it, and mount it if you can. Put it out there, and then just let the world have it. The world will figure out what to do with it when they do. And I who knows? Maybe, I don't know if Beckett and Pinter ever thought that a company in Philly would find this piece and do something about it.
I feel like the Beckett work, I've been grappling with this for the last couple of years of figuring out which we've never mounted one of the larger Becketts. I've been in them. I've done Endgame, not with our company but with another company, and I would say maybe 3 or 4 years ago I was like, we really have to get a what I call a big Beckett, or one of the more known ones on the map. But we're also looking at what else is happening in both New York and also Philadelphia, and can we sustain 3 productions of Godot in the same year, and all of that, which is why these smaller programs, which I think are so important, started to be in my head. And I think part of what happens in a Beckett play is a little bit of what I was describing when I went to see film, and that is, you're sitting in communion with a lot of other people in a room, and you're there because you understand that sometimes all you can do is sit with all of the enormity of what is happening for you. And that's really what these characters are going through. They are waiting. They are waiting for something that may or may not ever come, you know? And therein lies the sort of the brilliance, the beauty, the real humanity of the play is that sometimes that's all you can do. You can't talk about it. You can't argue about it. You can't, you just want to fall apart or cry but sometimes the hardest thing is to just sit with it. Yeah. There is a meditative quality about the work too, which makes it a little bit challenging sometimes on stage which is why you have kind of very different productions of it. And you'll hear some people say, oh, Lord, just shoot me in the head. I never want to sit through another Beckett play. And then you'll see some, and then other people will have the exact opposite reaction. And you'll see varying productions of it, some very active, some very involving a lot of clowning and a lot of miming and, sort of mining, which I think is really important to mine the humor and opposite the tragedy. The tragedy is already in there, so we want to follow both of those sides of the coin, but I felt remarkably like, what's the word? I don't know, rejuvenated in a way, not because any solution had been offered, not because there was anything better coming out of watching that film that night than going into it, but just to know that I felt like, without talking to anyone necessarily in the room, because it didn't even need to be said, that we were all just there because, obviously because we wanted to see Beckett, but because it represents something larger. And that is that when it all comes down to it, we really don't know how to manage this all there. We're here and we're here for a limited time. And the more we can get our heads, depending upon what your philosophy is, but if we can all get our heads around the fact that we're all in the same position, and that is that we're going to go, so that the work that we do here and what we come together and understand together while we are here can have significance. But it's recognizing that, because I think once you do recognize that it's all for naught in the end, in that way, then it becomes all that much more important how you manage that while you are here. Yeah, if that makes sense,
Yeah, it does. And there's also a lot of value in discovery. Just finding something on your own. This may not have been something that it was packed and was standing room only, but everyone who experienced it in that evening, in that space, at that moment in time, processed it together, but still took something uniquely. Something different away from it at that time. And you almost want to walk out of spaces and say, thank you. Just thank you. Thank you for having the foresight to put this, to make this available to us, to give us the opportunity to receive this, because we have so many options that it's hard to decide what. So someone had to curate this, So, we see that value in every single theater company that mounts a season. Thank you for curating this in this order, in this particular time. Thank you for pulling these artists together to interpret it in the way that they did, so that we can process it here this way, and we're not going to be able to do that again. There's no way for us to do it again exactly the way it happened on Wednesday. Will never happen again. And so all of that speaks to the beauty of live theater again.
Well, and I think more so than ever before, if we're not, let's just say, for instance, of all of the different things that you could choose to do in the evening. For me, that evening, it really wasn't about entertainment. Yeah. It was more about, where do I go? Like, I couldn't have been more, thrilled is not a great word, but just like I felt like this is where I need to be right now tonight. And I have found myself just spending a lot of time rereading much of the work that Beckett wrote, but also just his, work about his life and work about his trajectory and his attention to detail and his need to say this constant search for how to strip it more away so that what we have or what remains is just the essence of what of being, really. How do you like when you get an audience? This is kind of an interesting thing about directing this work as well, because what you're trying to do is communicate to an audience something that is really inexpressible. It's something that we create together with language as a tool, but it's not plot driven. So it isn't like my language is going to tell you the story. I'm going to communicate to you a situation which oftentimes doesn't go anywhere or is circular, or a situation in which, in the chairs, we have an old man and an old woman who are sitting in a lighthouse and they're 95 years old and there's nobody there. And so what do? They have a party and imaginary guests come and they get to, basically the old man is saying all of the things to these imaginary guests that he should have, would have, could have said in his life, but didn't say. And so he calls them all together to say thank you and to give his important message. But the interesting part is he doesn't think he is skilled enough to give his message himself, so he hires an orator to come give the message. And I won't, give away the end of the play, but it doesn't go so well, And part of the beauty of the play is that you are enough, that you have everything inside of yourself. And, the old woman tells him, you have no right to keep your message from the world. You must reveal it to mankind. They're waiting for it. The world waits only for you. And that gets back to what you talked about, young kids and writing their message and just like thinking about, okay, yes, we all have to make a living. And that's one of the big challenges of running it, running any kind of enterprise, running a small theater company is, okay, on one side of your brain is being a producing artistic director as opposed to just being an artistic director. I have to think about, okay, well, are we actually going to get people in the door? Because we don't have a big enough cushion. We do go show to show. We don't have a large enough cushion to be able to say, well, let's just take a risk this time. And let's just throw all caution to the wind and pull out some very important, esoteric Polish play from 1932 that was really fundamental to the way people understood the next 50 years, but then the little editor in my mind comes in and says, okay, well, that's really lovely, but is somebody, my little editor comes in, and I do think the Fringe is such a fabulous place to be able to do that because you can take bigger risks. I feel like as a company, we can take bigger risks, but that's why we created Into the Absurd. It's a free event. It's an opportunity to go to a place with other people in communion for an hour and just hear some pretty great language by some masterful writers. And just, there's something that happens in the room. It's like being a part of any other club that you're a part of, where you're like, oh yeah, you value the same things I do. Well, okay, great. And it's not exclusionary in that regard. It's more that it speaks universally because it's not about an intellect at a certain level or you having studied, these lofty, yes, on one hand, more has been written about Beckett than any other, playwright, I think, just in terms from an analysis and contextual standpoint. But in the end, if he could take Godot into San Quentin and have the kind of reaction that he did in the 60s where the inmates were there and understood fundamentally that was their story, then that's all of our stories. Do you know what I mean? Wherever you're waiting, you're waiting. You're waiting to understand. You might be waiting to be saved. You might be waiting to be given the big answer. But, crossing the river Indianesco, the answer lies within you. Yeah. And I think sometimes just finding those places where we can go, particularly in this. I mean, it's so confounding and so enormous, both emotionally, I'm talking about our present situation around the world, it almost borders on, you have to be kidding me. And that's what you see a lot on Facebook is like, what? Like, again? Like, it's astonishing. Yeah. Because of the speed at which we can receive information.
And then you have to question, am I not am I being insensitive because I don't change my profile pic, or
Well, I mean, I think all of these questions are, I mean, and then we don't know what to say, and then just like you said about Bastille Day, we share a space with the Bearded Ladies Cabaret, who is a rehearsal space. Just they own the space, and they run that space. But they were prepping for getting ready for, and I thought, wow, like as an artist with a company, then you have to think through what is the appropriate artistic response. Like I'm thinking, wow, they get to now go out and that makes it so much more for them today and tomorrow, I believe that, and I think it's both a privilege and it's a responsibility, and it is a communion with your fellow artists that are doing the same thing across the world. And what is that torch that, like, on one hand, you do feel much more connected with your artists, your people in around the world. There's a line from the Chairs that talks about Paris being, the place, the garden. It's basically the place where artists can go and be safe and create, and it can't be touched, and it can't be, and the old man says, Paris never existed, my little one. Now he's making a reference, to something else in his world. But it's really hard to get those lines out in this play and not just, think about your fellow people, artists that are creating, and what they consider to be, you can't touch this, like you can, and then hearing, of course, after the days and following the Paris attacks, on the street, people will not take this from us. We will not be, we must continue to be able to do this and create and get out there and say this. And I think that gets back to speaking to kids, just get out there and do it. And you'll find a way. You'll find a way to make it work, both, from an economic standpoint. And I do think, if your heart is in the right place, meaning you follow what truly interests you and what is meaningful for you in a very difficult time and place, you will connect with other people. That is that thing that can only be communicated, by sitting in communion with other people. Like, you'll find that place, and then that will be safe.
And the news had just mentioned that Nice is sort of functioning the way it functioned before. There are people walking around, there are people taking pictures, there are people shopping and biking and so on. This was tragic, and, but at the same time, we do have to continue to move on. And there is some sort of strength, and it is sort of a coping mechanism to continue. Instead of, sitting still in that moment for however long, and there's no, we don't even have any rules for how long we're supposed to just sort of,
to mourn these things. Yeah. I mean, it is. And when they come with such, the worry, of course, is that we become numb to them, and that it's almost unfathomable that, that in a half a day's time, you can go to work and maybe just be absorbed in your work and then come out and think, wow, okay, I'm doing my day-to-day thing that I have to do to keep going. And yet, across the sea, across the world, these enormous events are happening that are changing people's lives forever. It struck me in a way. You mentioned, how things are so different now because of social media. And I remember the day that my father passed away, and I remember walking out of the hospital, and it was like an extraordinarily hot day, and thinking, why isn't the whole world stopping right now? Not because he was so important. I mean, he was an important person in my life, but having that magnitude and thinking, my world will never be the same. Yeah. And when you think about that, that is the way more and more so many people are being affected by these monumental events that are so violent and so traumatic. And what is the proper way of coping with that, to be respectful? And I haven't, fortunately, we all are feeling something, and that we aren't all so numb that, I'm not sure what you say to the person that says, well, why are you feeling this way? It didn't happen to you, or it didn't happen. That's that's concerning on some level, I think, you know.
On social media, it's followed by a long post about why you're going to unfriend a bunch of people.
Right. Sure. Yeah. And I think that presents its own set of, I don't even know what, like, I haven't managed to work my way through that yet. In fact, I've sort of found that I really have to just kind of go away. Like, I have found that reading a book, sitting in a park, just picking up a good old fashioned Beckett reader, you know, and just like, and yeah, that's escapism. I mean, it's the same thing. Like, I'm escaping into this world of language, which produces such an internal feeling in me of connection, of what it means to be human.
But it doesn't mean you're not aware, you know. It's just that we have to continue to move forward. I guess if you were in a race, like if you ever watch some of these cyclist races, and somebody has a crash, you know, everybody doesn't stop racing. You have to keep going.
Well, somebody's got to keep the flag, you know, keep the flag going in the forward, whatever that means.
And it's not that they're not aware that just happened and that it could very well happen to them. You know, we sort of move forward. We proceed with caution.
Yeah. And I mean, it's true. You do. I have had to think a lot about even just sending, you know, sort of communicating about this show next Sunday. I really did think I went through the email and had to really look at the order in which things were presented in the email, because, you know, we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year as well. And so there's some sort of fun surrounding that, and some, you know, we want people to just be aware of that. But, you know, looking at it, I thought, no, really, this series needs to jump to the top of this email, and this needs to go below, because you're also representing how your sort of artistic mission handles that as well. So it does require, which I think is a really good thing, some being very aware of what your language, this tool that we use that's insufficient on some level at communicating exactly. Like, as I'm sitting here talking to you today, like, I can see your face and I'm feeling what you're feeling. Yeah. But that's the part we lose sometimes. You know, I mean, I think radio is great at that because it picks up only that, and then hopefully within that voice you hear it. But that's the beauty and why theater is such a wonderful place to be, because in community, you know, it doesn't happen on that stage, particularly in a small space, without what you guys, what is being emanated out of each and every one of you, and you can feel that. You can feel it.
And we used to, so in the past, for various reasons, we would just go silent whenever there was something, you know, we don't change our banners, we don't change our, you know, anything. We'll just, I was going to put an episode out on Monday, but I'll hold it. Because right now, we do not need to take up anyone's attention on this. That doesn't mean what we had to put out is not important. It's not the primary focus. It's not priority right now. It's respect, in a sense. So, but it never, before, at least when Rep Radio had a very specific focus, I didn't feel like it was our place to be a part of the conversation if we were ultimately promoting the work. And we're going to change that now, because artists have voices too, and we are having these conversations. And you know, I had an interview with our Eric Thomas about his piece, and I think we had the interview the day before Orlando. So, you know, we're sitting there talking about the nostalgia of the GLBT community in Philadelphia, and then the episode comes out, and does not mention this at all. Yeah. And you know, it definitely made me think, and I said, you know, we have to. But those conversations, we don't put them on hold. Let's just we bring them into what we're talking about.
You've got to have a place to go, and it's going to change. You know, I mean, it's going to change the way that we think about it, and the focus that it takes for all of us, you know, for people that are inside the community and those that are trying more to understand what what any group of people is going through, isn't that part of what the art is?
Yeah.
Is struggling to find a place to put things. And it's funny because in the first a number of years, maybe the first 5 years that the IRC was, formed in 2006, it felt like the expression of what we were putting out there on stage was just cacophony. I mean, there's a lot of it's anxiety. It's internal states externalized, and that's generally what kind of sets things in motion and makes them become absurd is the inability of people to communicate properly and missed signals there.
Want to get involved with Broad Street Review? Head on over to our website at www.broadstreetreview.com and click Get Involved at the top. While you're there, help keep us running and click Contribute to find out how. Connect with us on social media, on Facebook and Twitter at Broad Street Review.
But now the air is so full of that. The air is so full of cacophony. Meaningful. The air meaning you just walk out into the city and you feel the sorrow and you also feel the energy and the anxiety. And I think it's most interestingly seen in the Pokemon. I'm watching that with just total, really interesting fascination.
I just saw an ad or a post from Visit Philly. Visit Philly just posted where you can find, the tourist attractions that are Pokestops. Yeah. And everyone's involved now. Yelp just created a filter that allows you to find the Pokestops. There was a conversation like the Holocaust Museum was like, please stop battling here.
Yeah.
Because it's a destination. So I think that the key destinations end up becoming gyms.
Yes.
I still don't claim to understand Pokemon. I was never hardcore into Pokemon. My friend sent me a text saying, have you downloaded this Pokemon Go yet? And I'm IT, I'm technology, I'm on top of everything, but I was not one of the first to download Pokemon Go. But he said they're doing something really different here, and this is really unique and really exciting. You should give it a shot. So I download it, and actually the building I live in, there's a restaurant on the ground floor. So the restaurant is a Pokestop. So you can tell that they are here for Pokemon Go, right? Because everybody has this look. Everyone's sort of weering this unofficial costume.
We're in this together, right?
Yes, they're in this together.
Right.
And you all just give this look. It's kind of like, I've pointed out in various interviews, there's a look you give them when you get to Walnut Street Theater and you get to the glass door, and they know that you belong here, and they buzz you right in without thinking.
Yes.
So I feel like that with the Pokemon,
it's
too.
It's an unspoken sort of, My son was really young when, he was very young when Pokemon first came out, and he was really into it. But now, he's here. And he's got, it is lovely, though. I think on one hand, watching, sitting in the park the other day in South Philly and watching mostly groups of two men is what I was seeing. Occasionally you'd see a guy and a woman. It's friends and couples. I didn't see on my kind of like informal thing I was doing, observation. I didn't see too many women. I saw a couple, but there's sort of a journeyman aspect to it, that is, and I think that's a version of I'm focusing. I don't know because I'm not doing it, but what it appears to be is I'm absorbing myself in this thing that has a purpose, that has a union with other people, that is a somewhat of a way of making sense, I guess. I don't want to speak because I'm not doing it, so I don't know, but there's a bit of a beauty in it, I think.
There is a sense of art to it as well. It is the equivalent of us all going into a theater and seeing a show that does not have a talkback, because there's no way for us to really connect inside of the app with other people who are interacting with the app. At least at the moment. Maybe they will do some sort of update and you can find your friends and whatnot. But right now, it's just you.
You gotta kind of, isn't it what's happening? I think like we're seeing a bunch of people coming down our street because there's some sort of a flag or whatever.
Well, they're going down together because these stops have these little symbols, and then you spin them and you get more balls. You get extras. But there's no sort of call to action in it yet. Right. So I don't know if that's going to come out, and they haven't even released it they just released it in the UK, but like 7.5 million people downloaded it. It like, I think, I don't know who owns it, Nintendo or somebody, their stock went up like 25% because of this game. It's crazy because I was saying, there's a group that I'm a part of on Facebook that created a group specifically for the people doing Pokemon Go. And they're pretty much just sharing pictures of the characters they've captured or any news that's coming out.
Yes,
relevant.
Yeah.
And the description is like, are your friends annoyed by your obsession with Pokemon Go? Well, come here and join our community. They're creating a safe space.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's, and you know, the idea that you share this whatever it is, this it feels very artistic, you know, with other people is a form in and of itself of safety.
Yeah. So the next Into the Absurd is July 24th, and that is right on the heels of the Democratic National Convention. And one of the questions I wanted to present to you, or I wanted to get your take on absurdist drama and the present state politics regarding the election and social upheaval that has come about in the past few months?
Well, when we first began in 2006, you know, there was this, we would get asked the question a lot, is there going to be enough material for you guys? And do you think that people are really, that's the stuff that's way out there, or really hard to understand, or silly, and I said, well, you know, it's you know, it's existentialist. So we're really dealing with what it means to be, you know, to be alive for a finite bit of time on this earth, and what those important things that we experience are, where we put our values. And over the course of the last 10 years, I will say, particularly over the last 5 years, that the work that is on stage, or the work that we are doing, is paling in comparison to, like, there was a point at which the work on the stage was so far removed from, you know, I mean, both in its dramatic form, but also in just day-to-day life. Yeah. Now, this stuff is nothing compared to, I mean, there's, you know, and it's, I don't know if I have an answer for you, Darnelle. I mean, I feel like I have a very difficult time in the last 6 months understanding what I'm really seeing. Yeah. Particularly with certain candidates. You know, I'm just like, is this the real thing? Is this a disguise? Is this what? And I'm not, when I say I'm not very political, I mean, I pay attention, and I certainly have but it's hard to imagine there being any theatrical event that could be more absurd than any of the debates that we've watched, for instance, some earlier on this year that in which there were so many just kind of, you know, I mean, you couldn't write this stuff. Yes. So so I've had to back away and think, okay, so what does this work then say in light of that? Because you're not going to outdo it. I mean, you know, the best, I'm not going to say the best theater, but it's certainly a theater of the absurd is happening right now in front of us, and in our city, you know, coming soon. So the question is, what does this work have to say about that?
Yeah.
And I felt like that's why I wanted to go the opposite direction, was instead of trying to, think in any way that this is further out there than that, let's go the opposite way. And that's kind of where Into the Absurd came. Let's go back to a more contemplative state. Let's just strip all of this away, get back to the basics, because it's so cacophonous and so nonsensical that is what I say to myself is, what would Ionesco have to say about this now? Could he ever imagine that the stuff that he was putting on stage in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s, which seemed so ridiculous, is nothing in comparison to what we're seeing. And I really am having a hard time making sense of it, honestly, from a standpoint of, okay, well, if the candidate that I was the most firmly behind is now not in the race now, what do I do with this? And how do I be a citizen in this world that cares about what happens when I'm having a hard time understanding what I'm voting for? Like, I've lost my meter on on the reality of that. And again, I find myself slipping away to, I'm having trouble making sense of it.
And it's also how is it that clearly there was a clear front runner in terms of the popular vote? How was that not factored in those decisions?
I mean, what are we even... I don't even know who I'm voting for. That's part of the problem.
And there's so many...
And I can't figure it out. And I understand that reading more and watching more will theoretically help me, but I can't make my way through it enough. And it's gotten so distorted for me that I just... the only resort is sitting on a bench with Beckett and just going back to square one. And I'm like, maybe the answer will come to me if I just strip it all away and I just go back to the essence of but it's not changing things anyway. It's just getting more ridiculous. So I'm hoping maybe the convention. I mean, this seemed to be our only response in the face of the convention, was to just sit in a place and talk about these things.
When in doubt, take it back
to Beckett. Right. I mean, I just strip away, because literally that's, isn't that what he was doing, was trying to strip away. And this is the same with Pinter. Strip away all excess, strip away, get to the most fundamental aspect of trying to communicate what it means to be a human being. And because it's so confounding and so confusing, I mean, I can't make heads or tails out of some of what these candidates are saying. I don't. And so therefore, what is my vote?
Yeah.
What am I voting? I don't know what I'm voting for. And when did it become okay to, well, that's just what he's doing right now, but that's going to change? I don't know that.
Why are we okay with that now? We would have never been okay with that before. In the past. And now we're totally well, if he stays on message...
What? Right? Why should a person have to read a teleprompter in order to be told it's not okay to go over that boundary? What happened to the theory of...
This is the equivalent of the people of Oz seeing behind the curtain and saying,
it's all going to be okay.
If he stays behind the curtain, we'll be okay. We can pretend we didn't see it, and it'll be fine. In what
universe does that mean anything? Right. Well, so then I have to go back to, this is just as cacophonous as what Ionesco talked about, which is a lot of fury signifying nothing. It's just a bunch of words.
Yeah.
And I can't get a consistent bead on the sort of the consistency of ethics, or because I don't know where that lands. And for me, and I'm sure, for a lot of people, it's well, you're voting for a person, not, you're voting for a person who theoretically has a series of fundamental beliefs about the way in which they conduct themselves and the world should be. And if you can't get a straight beat on that, then I don't know. The rest of it is just static.
But I think the one thing that we forget is it's not just one person. We're basically, we are, in a way, dissolving an organization and building another one. But we're only concerned about who leads that organization. And that's part of the problem too. If we're only, because part of the conversation is that most people are they only vote in the presidential election. They don't vote in the off elections when all of that counts, because the president can't actually get anything done if there's if the makeup of if the makeup does
is
not
such that they're not going to right.
Yeah, so we forget about that. So you would never walk into a new. You would never, like, we're in this building right now, this business. If the CEO of this building were to retire, it's the equivalent of closing for a few days and then reopening with similar staff but new people, and not factoring in that there has been change. And it's part of the problem, and it's why people end up feeling like, well, nothing's going to change anyway, because we still have this obstruction. So it doesn't, some people will say it doesn't matter who's at the top of the ticket. It doesn't matter who wins, because there's still going to be this obstruction down here that's not going to allow anything to happen. And it's, our system of checks and balances is in place to work, but when? It's supposed to work, but it doesn't. It doesn't
appear to be
a
huge majority of people,
it should almost
saying it's not working, and yet
it should almost not matter who. It should almost not matter who is sitting in these roles, because the way the system was built to maintain a flow, and we don't have a flow, even though we still have that system. It is such a stressful thing, and if I keep telling myself, why are you in a rush to get out of here at 5:00? You're just going home when you really should be going to the gym, or maybe going out to the park, or maybe just escaping until the entertainment that you can escape into starts at 8:00. Because if you get home between 5:30, you're just consuming news. There's nothing else on but news. And my television, I turned it off on the cable news channel. I will turn it back on the cable news channel. And I don't know why. It's background fodder for me, in a sense. There's a part of me that feels like if I don't process all, or if I don't consume all of it, I'm going to miss something important. But it's all the same. It resets every hour and just tells you exactly what they were just talking about in the last hour, with a little bit of breaking news peppered in. So there is this conversation that it's all entertainment, which brings you back to, how do we know what the candidates are saying is actually real, or really their position, or are they just entertainment? Are they just entertainers?
Well, you do wonder, and I don't have it, and I never used to have that problem in elections prior, wondering if, thinking that, wondering, asking that question.
Yeah. And in other situations, like you can tell the difference between an entertainer and an artist.
A performer and an artist.
A performer and an artist. Like, you can tell the difference between those two. But this,
the lines, I think, are very much blurred there, and yet it's fascinating how we have gone. We're at the polarity of people in this election process. How much it's polarized. You spoke earlier of the people, I'm unfriending you all. So people obviously are, all of that feeling about everything that's happening, the politics, the world being an increasingly a place where we might be inclined to be more fearful. These events that are happening, and are they connected to something? And then the analysis that has to come following an event. Was it was this one person? Was this connected to other people? And I haven't found a way to process all of that and the feeling that goes along with that, because the events are coming so rapidly. Yeah, it feels like.
And I think we may have answered this through this conversation, which has been dynamic.
Oh, yeah,
amazing.
I don't think I just want to say I don't think that I answered your question about absurdism and the age of politics, but I think we're taking a backseat to the whole thing.
No,
honestly.
no, and that is fine, because I think that's where so many people are. We don't have answers, and we are lost. We are very confused, and the systems that we had in place that were supposed to right this ship are not righting the ship. And
that's where I think all the
everybody
confusion
feels that way,
and
you know, the only response that I have is that we all need to be, you know, as artists, as creators, that we need to be changing our plans. So if you already have your season lined up, you might need to rethink it to speak to what's going on right now, because if we see another piece that does not speak to anything going on right now, that is just fluff for fluff's sake, you will not. I mean, you're going to get people to go there, but really you're just doing yourself a disservice if you're not saying, like, we've got this platform and there are confused and scared and frustrated people out there, and we need to find the work that gives them a little bit of clarity, provokes conversation. We need to give them you know, stuff that's going to actually empower them to move forward, instead of escaping to a time that once was. And that has been the criticism of some companies who, you know, have a very specific audience who wants to escape to a time that once was. But the beauty of regional theater is that we can take chances, even if we don't consider it a risk. We can have a talk back. Mm-hmm. All of this actually, supports institutional marketing. The one thing I thought about into the absurd is you're basically giving an audience an opportunity to understand Idiopathic Ridiculopathy Consortium, because you're taking down the barriers of accessibility by making it free, and then you're allowing for a conversation to be had at the end. So, you know, that in itself would make someone walk out and say, oh, you know, maybe before they walked in and it was IRC, but they walk out and it's Idiopathic Ridiculopathy Consortium.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, it is what you bring a great praise. It's a challenge that we've had since we started, and that is just to get over people's, you know, to help them to understand or get over this idea that, oh, I saw a play in high school, or I tried to read, this is the other thing, I tried to read this thing on the page, and honestly, that's one of the reasons we hadn't done a reading series, because you need to see it, because it is so meta, you know, you need to feel what's happening in between the words, and you need to feel what's happening in the audience. It really isn't something that reads well on the page, and that's why a lot of people abandon it when they try to read it, or they're forced to read it in their French class or in college or whatever. You know, they're just sort of like, I don't know what in the world. And I get actors all the time saying, if I, you know, ask them to audition, they'll be like, I have no idea what's going on in this thing, but it seems pretty funny, so I'm gonna, you know, like I'd like to audition for this.
I always think about that. I want to go back to college English in high school and say, why were you not in cahoots with the drama department? Before we turn our pages to a Shakespeare piece, we should have been able to see it. And then come back to the classroom and now try to process it.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people will end up turning the other way. And that's why they think it's either silly or nonsensical, but it's actually very logical in a way that is so perfectly suited for this day and age. I just feel like this guy's, I mean, not that, you know, I getting back to that question that people say, you know, once you guys get off the top 10 on the big hit list of famous absurdist plays that we've seen, where are you going to go? And the answer is, talking about taking risks, there are so many amazing Russian, Polish, you know, playwrights who are writing in and around the same time, right just before Beckett was writing, and dealing with the great tumult that was happening in Europe, and writing during a very similar time. And you read them today and you feel like they are talking about today.
And it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that new work might not. It doesn't mean that new work won't be inspired by that as well.
Well, that's why when getting back to the encouraging kids to write, or encouraging anyone to write, just write it. If it's speaking to you, there's a reason you're writing it right now. There's a place that you had to get to right now to be able to say this, and that is going to resonate with other people. And don't worry about like that when we started the company, it was just like we just didn't worry about, just build it and let's just see if they come.
Yeah.
And we built it and and fortunately other people were feeling the same way. So I think you build on this. It's Into the Absurd, a workshop. And come up with some absurd plays. Yeah. I mean, we're also we're going to be doing it. It's sort of an ongoing series that we're going to continue. We're trying to do 3 a year. And we're going to be looking from, we did an American playwright, and then, this is Beckett and Pinter, and then we're going to be looking at bringing forward a European playwright. But it is an opportunity, like you said, for people to understand it on a more sort of a different experiential way, without having the bells and whistles of the production in front of it to kind of distract, in a way that it becomes about the language, and it becomes about, and then you get to hear a little bit more about the comments that they were really trying to make about what was happening in the world at that time.
Yeah. All right, well, tell us the two plays. Tell us the name of the two plays again.
It's Family Voices, which is the Harold Pinter play, and then Rough for Radio 2, which is the Samuel Beckett play that we'll be producing.
And that is July 24th at Latage.
Latage at 7:30.
7:30.
And it's a free event, but we ask people if they can to go to Brown Paper Tickets and get a ticket, just because we can only seat so many people in there.
Which you definitely should, because the fact that it's free is the equivalent of getting a comp. You get a comp, and I mentioned to a couple of companies that when I get a comp, I should get an envelope to contribute. You've got a free ticket, but now that you've seen it, support us.
Yeah.
And I think yes. So there is an opportunity to support here, which you should definitely opt to support, because conversation is essential. We can't just process the work without really.
So much of the detail is in the just as in the work on characters. So much of the detail of the understanding that is unspoken happens in the. I think if theater communities were to theme a season, if a community as a whole would theme a season, it would be something like "Be in the room where it happens," because we're talking about that all the time, and thanks to Hamilton, because it's always in there. But seriously, being in the room where it happens is so much. There's so much more reward there than going off on your own and processing it, or folding laundry and processing it, as they talk about in, when they're creating TV series. They always talk about these laundry moments. But being in that room and escaping from everything else to just process this for this moment, and then having the opportunity to be a part of a conversation about what you just processed, is so valuable. And I'm a huge fan of talkbacks. I don't know why I haven't pushed to do some sort of talkback series, but I always say all the work that's new definitely needs a talkback. We need an understanding. We need to know where this came from, how did it get from page to stage. And so on, and how the ideas of we should do this to we've done this, are very important for us. And people's interpretations are so very, very different, which is one of the exciting things that comes out. Both Beckett and Pinter leave a lot to you, whatever you're going to bring to the table, based on how that language resonates within you. But even just trying to decide if we should do, the Rough for Radio 2 piece, one of the two people that helps to select the plays for us, he had a very different take on the piece than I did. I didn't do much research about the piece before we decided, and they're very different interpretations of what that is. Of what Beckett's actually trying to say in this piece.
Yeah. Well, this was a great conversation.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this.
I was thinking that we would end up talking for maybe like a hard 27 minutes. Sometimes it's hard to get, the who, what, where, when, and why. Once you get that, we can't really go too far without giving so much away. But because of the time frame and the nature of this work, it just allowed us to just sort of go on to so many different places. This production, this event, is called Into the Absurd, and it is being produced by Idiopathic Ridiculopathy Consortium, and it's on July 24th at 7:30 at Latage, which is on 6th and Bainbridge.
Yep.
And we will have a link for the tickets, but I believe it's radioplays.pt.me.
BPT.me. Brown paper tickets.
Brown paper tickets. And so we'll have that link, or you can go to Idiopathic Ridiculopathy Consortium website. It's the full name.org.
It is, but if you even get close, it'll come up. If you get
idiopathic Philadelphia in a search,
it'll come up.
You will find it, but get comfortable with the name if you're not already comfortable. Tina, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For chatting with me on this hot summer day as we approach, as the absurd rolls into Philadelphia, as we try to process all of the drama that was not created for entertainment, as we continue to move forward in life, as we try to make sense of everything that's going on. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.